again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Teresa. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by Ben from Cleave to Antiquity. How you doing today, brother?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on, man.
Oh, dude, thanks for having me on. That was actually, I was just telling you backstage, this is the first stream I've done basically 2 weeks. So my wife and I just moved, so a la the new background here. But right before I actually moved, one of the last things I did was go on your channel and fielded some questions, mostly about icons. Protestants had big hang-ups with icons and Mary.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, but yeah, we fielded questions for about 2.5 hours over on your channel. So thanks for having me on over there. And you know, obviously, most people watching here is probably already familiar with your journey and your conversion, but we're gonna kind of build upon that today. We're not going to focus so much on just you, although we're going to, first thing I'm going to ask you is to describe a little bit about, for anybody who'd be watching now or in the future, who may not be familiar with you or your apologetic work as a Protestant before. Do you mind kind of introducing yourself and why you've kind of been making the rounds on the Orthodox scene and really having a bunch of people on your channel too, fielding questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been an awesome an awesome journey so far. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ben. My channel's Cleave to Antiquity. I was an associate pastor at a Protestant church, and I would do Protestant apologetics and debates and things like that. I've been on several, the bigger, I guess, Protestant shows. Gavin Ortland show I was on, Redeem Zoomer, Ruslan, so on and so forth. I've done debates with Roman Catholic linguistics scholar Trent Doherty, several other people. But eventually, in the journey of studying church history, and kind of when you do debates, you kind of have to have a coherent worldview, like a complete. Right. It has to be a complete circle. When you have like a little chink in the armor, it makes you reflect, and then you have to kind of bridge that somehow. And for me, most of those chinks in the armor were historical claims I would have to go back and reevaluate. So I think from an intellectual perspective, being faced with corrections on some of the framework that I was using before, like if I would do debates on like Marian devotion, I would cite like Subtuum Presidium. It's like 250 AD, earliest Marian devotion or something. So it's like, okay, so I've got a good 250 years before, I have to worry about any of this stuff. So I can kind of, I can work with that a little bit rhetorically. But I remember having a conversation with Craig Truglia, and he's like, well, there's this etching on the side of the Church of the Annunciation that says Hail Mary. And I was like, I got you. That could just be the Annunciation of Luke, right? Like they're just quoting scripture. He's like, yeah, but what about these in catacombs that are talking about, I forget the name, but it was like Cornelius, pray for us or something. I'm like, okay, 1st, 2nd century, that's a little tough to deal with. Right. So, you have to reevaluate that kind of framework consistently from the Protestant perspective. And I came to realize after some time that a lot of my critiques, with the Orthodox when I would do debates are really like practice things. It's not so much like the actual theology. It would be like application of canons or like, so on and so forth.
Right.
Which is not a good enough reason to not become Orthodox. So the real key thread that started to get pulled was really diving into Eucharistic theology. So you read like John 6:53 through 60, talks about the Eucharist is necessary, talks about, I will abide in you, you'll abide in me. If you do not eat my flesh and blood, you have no life in you. So it's okay, this is necessary language. Now, how do I know I have a valid Eucharist, right? Go look at Matthew 16:18, Matthew 18:18, talks about the keys to bind and loose, given to all of the apostles, right? Matthew 16:18 says, I will give you the keys. Matthew 18:18, they're actually given, right. And they're given to all the apostles. So apostolic succession is necessary to be able to have a valid Eucharist, right? And then look at Acts 1. Well, they had successors. So, there's some pieces of my framework that need to be adjusted. And ultimately, I had all that information at some point, but I needed that little spark of grace to bring light to that information. And once that happened, it was, I had to go. If I believe this is the church that Christ established, then nothing's going to stop me from wanting to enter into her.
Well, that's what I was going to lead to next, is the sincerity of what it sounds like your journey. I mean, when was the moment that you felt like you had to make a decision? Because I've talked with a lot of Protestants. I have a lot of friends that are Protestant. And when it comes to Orthodoxy, once you get over the differences from Catholicism, they realize you're not Catholic. And then a little bit more nuance. Obviously, your approach doing apologetics, you had a much stronger understanding of the delineations between these traditions. But they'll say, okay, I agree with that. I agree with that. But they always have these hangups. And it sounds like you were aware of many of the canons, and you were aware of many of the traditions of Eastern Orthodoxy. What was it that kind of just pushed you over the edge?
I think maybe the thing that started the avalanche was being actually convinced of, well, it would be a couple of different things, because it was a complete reevaluation of the worldview. But I guess it started with accepting apostolic succession as basically an apostolic tradition. And that's what the early church fathers point to it as. This is an apostolic tradition. So if you're consistent in your worldview, and you believe that apostolicity is, I guess kind of a benchmark for binding, I guess, or I guess apostolicity would be a benchmark for, I guess, later on infallibility.
Right.
It might be getting too deep in the weeds, but if you're operating from that framework, then if you can prove apostolic succession is an apostolic tradition, you have to submit yourself to it. So that was one thing that really, I guess, was like a rock that was moved that started the avalanche.
And you didn't make the move immediately, think, oh, then I'll become Anglican or High Lutheran.
No, because
as we talked about in your stream, some people still claim that apostolic connection within those high forms of Protestantism.
Right. Well, the problem with that is if you were to take, so let's say, look at the church of the first millennium, right? So if you're an Anglican, you say you hold to the ecumenical councils somewhat, right? But you don't hold to any of the anathemas. Like you say that the non-Chalcedonians are cool, so on and so forth. You have branch theory. So if you're operating under that Anglican framework, you can kind of just, how are you actually holding to the ecumenical councils? How are you applying the canons? You're really not. You're just kind of holding to the general idea. And even if you were to look at a lot of the different Anglican groups, many of them reject the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And if those that don't, that's a huge issue for their framework, because you look at the 39 articles, they're iconoclastic. So, like, I don't know. If you can, another thing, when you look at archaeological evidence of the early church, you see icons everywhere, dude. Like,
we belabor that point over on your stream.
Yeah. How are you going to accept an iconoclastic framework with the early church having tons of icons? And no, we're actually retrieving apostolicity by rejecting
that we had a couple comments over on your channel where people were claiming that the icons basically were invented around the time of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, or that there was no evidence before like the 600s. Like, dude, what are you talking about? These are just historical facts. Whether you like icons, it's just a historical fact that they were being used in pedagogical and liturgical purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like a firestorm right now on Twitter where people are fighting over icons. I don't know if you noticed that. There's a Catholic gentleman, Kevin, from Since 33 AD, that made the claim that icon veneration isn't present in the early church. I guess maybe not realizing that means he rejects Nicaea too, since it claims specifically the reason for its inclusion, as necessary for the church, is that it's an apostolic tradition. So if you claim it's a development, you're de facto rejecting Nicaea too. So that's a bit of an issue. But some of the Protestants kind of like grabbed his argument. We're like, oh, look, we agree with the Catholics. It's the Orthodox that are out of the bounds here,
Right. Yeah, that totally undermines the Catholic position, and even their use of statuary and stuff like that, which has a different totalizing theology from our use of icons. But the similar premise is that God was actual man and sanctified matter, and so creation itself can be used to glorify God. But you're married, correct?
Yeah.
So how was your wife's reception? That's always a big talking point. And you kind of hinted at it in our convo, but we didn't really dive into it. I mean, it wasn't my job to pry and ask questions like it is right now. But so many men that I've talked to and done one-on-ones with, converting into the Orthodox Church, one of the things is usually the men are a little bit more obsessive. And so just like you being a bookworm and really interested in history, which was that, and the coherency of the theology is what just convinced me I got to go Orthodox. I mean, the historical argument, I think, is incredibly compelling if you're going to be honest about it. And I think that's what your testimony is so interesting, is because once you were kind of confronted with the things that you said you believed and what you're looking for, you actually made the choice and you made the move. But so many men, it's us guys that like take this stuff serious, and then the women are like, "Are you joining a cult? Like, what is this?" They're trying to explain the essence energy distinction, at dinner, and it's like, so sometimes the women aren't as enthusiastic as the men are about these conversions to Orthodox. Sometimes I have actually, shout out to Kingdom Kid. We have women that actually convert to Orthodoxy and then drag their husbands kicking and screaming into the church. But mostly it's men. And I'm curious, within your circumstances, how was she very willing? Was she kind of submissive to your understanding and said, well, if that's what you think, then we'll do it?
Yeah, I think, at first, obviously a bit of a shock. I mean, we've had conversations about we've had conversations about church history and things like that, so it wasn't like a huge like jump scare surprise. But when I finally made the decision, you know, and I'm like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. You know, there was a little bit of pushback, of course, but I think understanding and expecting it, you know, so I'm not like, I know I'm not going to win this as an argument kind of deal helped.
Right.
And more just like, all right, this is the time I need to like really lock in. I'm going to do the dishes. I'm going to fold the laundry, you know. But I think I was talking about this with, Father John Whitford, and he gave the advice to somebody else. And he was like, you're never going to win them with like an argument. Like you got to win them over with the culture and that kind of like, they need the socializing aspect. Cause I mean, I was an associate pastor, you know, we're super plugged into our church. We knew everybody, you know, it's like family. Right. So it's like asking you to like leave your family is a hard thing.
Right. Incredibly difficult.
But what was really helpful for me was we had good friends that are local that I go to an Orthodox church. We visited with them. We went and visited their Rocor parish. And then afterwards went and grabbed lunch. And it's like, oh, these are like normal people. Like, you know, okay. So now maybe I can see that I'll have community here and this will be a good thing. I think that definitely helped. But it also helps that, I don't know, I'm blessed. My wife is awesome. You know, she was like, I disagree on some things, but you know, you're my husband. I'm going to go where you go. So
that's a good woman. Yeah. We appreciate hearing her willingness to follow you. It sounds like she's a good Christian wife. And, you know, that journey leaving your parish, you know, one of the things that I always concede to Catholics, I have a couple Catholic friends who are still struggling. They're kind of convinced intellectually of Orthodoxy, but they won't leave Catholicism. And it's because of the ancestral identity with Catholicism. But with Protestants, it's not so much ancestral as it is the communities that you're actually a part of, the fabric, being part of the fabric of the community. And as we mentioned over on your channel, that was my advice for anybody wanting to join the Orthodox Church, any guy, and your wife or your girlfriend's reluctant, you got to find other women for her to talk to, because it's about the social entrance is kind of the essential gateway. At least I found, not for every woman. There's some women, you know, that are convinced by rational argumentation. Probably not the majority for anybody out there. So finding a social network for them to belong to is usually the go-to. And that kind of leads to the question that I was telling you in the on backstage that I wanted to pry and get your perspective on. Don't know if you've been thought about this or been asked this question, but one of the things that I felt converting to Orthodoxy is that, you know, I grew up in a Methodist family, kind of conservative Methodist, and then our family identity for at least 4 or 5 generations is tied with the Methodist Church. And when I then left that and became New Age, pro-psychedelic, dabbling in the occult, and then eventually finding my way to the Orthodox Church, I felt like it was almost like a correction of my ancestral tree. And thinking about, you know, deep ancestry goes back to Western Europe, and before the schism, it's all sort of Orthodox, one church. And I kind of always felt, and I think I mentioned it early on this channel, one of the very early videos, that was kind of my perspective on this sort of ancestral historic transition that I was a part of, and how it was like a fixing of the family tree so that we have a strong foundation, a true foundation to build, because my children and their children, hopefully their children, will all be Orthodox. And so it's kind of a recentering of these historic processes from the schism to the Reformation, the Enlightenment, all this different stuff. And my wife told me the same thing. She's a Volga German. So they're a mixture. They're Germans that lived in Russia for hundreds and hundreds of years and have like a mixture of German Russian culture. They speak Russian. And though when she became Orthodox, she felt the same thing. Curious for you, coming out of the life that you were in as an associate pastor and your Protestant background, when you convert, or is this process of conversion, because obviously you still have to become a catechumen, that's going to take probably a year at least. Do you view it in any sort of ancestral correction or a larger perspective, or is this like, this is just the right thing to do and it's kind of divorced from your ancestors? What are your thoughts on? I know that's kind of long-winded question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's intrinsic to the entire question, right? Like, were my ancient Christian ancestors did their worship look more like the worship of the Orthodox Church, or did it look more like my Protestant concept of worship? And
Yeah.
am I even a part of the same church? Am I a part of the same religion, broadly speaking? You know what I mean? And I guess the answer to that would be, from the Protestant perspective, no, you're not a part of the same church, because you're a schism of a schism at that point.
Right.
It ultimately is a historical question, and if you're going to look at the question of your ancestry, if you're going to look at, like, my background, almost entirely English, so similar kind of ancestry.
Same.
You know, from that perspective, pre-schism church, what does it look like? Does it look like any of the Protestant denominations today? Does it look like the Roman Catholic Church, the modern Roman Catholic Church? Or does it look like the Orthodox Church? Well, yeah, it would be the Orthodox Church. Even
Right.
theologically, we can look at aesthetics. Look at some of the catacomb churches in Rome. We were talking about that in our live stream that we did on my channel. Look at the catacomb churches in Rome. They've got the domes with the icons all over the walls. What does it look like? Looks like the architecture of a modern Orthodox church, the same as today. So, the question of, like, that ancestral retrieval, absolutely, and taking bits and pieces of your worldview and twisting them, or innovating them, or modernizing them in any way. From the Protestant perspective, it's like a complete modernization of it. But even the smallest tweak has ramifications downstream. So, yeah, absolutely, it's a correction of not only the worldview, but also the view of being in a real communion of the saints, having a great cloud of witnesses around us, actually having the saints as like our family members, basically, in a more, I guess, tangible way.
Right. What are your thoughts about the future of Protestantism? I mean, having been so deeply enmeshed into American Protestantism in the 21st century, one of my theories is I do believe in the next, God willing, we're here for another century or two, the human species.
Right.
Protestantism is pretty much going to die away. When you look at, like, the Pew Research Center in regards to the average age of attendee, it's Orthodoxy, Islam, and Hinduism and Buddhism in America that have an average age below 40. And then Catholicism is the next one. I think theirs was like 42 average age. But then the Protestants are like in the 60s or higher. So there's a huge generational difference in regards to the average attendees. But just the staying power of Protestantism, I argue that there is no formerly Protestant nation, you could argue, that's still explicitly Christian. I mean, people make the case that America is still Christian. I mean, you can, but my larger point is we're the biggest exporters of degeneracy. It's not exactly the epitome of a Christian nation.
Right.
But what are your thoughts on Protestantism? If you had to speculate the next century or two, where do you think it's going? Do you think that they'll have their own, so maybe a third wave revival, or it's going to merge in, Zionism is going to grow, or what are your thoughts on Protestantism moving forward?
Yeah, I was talking about this recently on X, where we were sharing some statistics from the LCMS, which is a conservative Lutheran denomination, one of the main lines, and they have projections that they will fall under, what was it, 50,000 weekly attendance overall by, what was it, 2080 or something. So
Wow.
that's next to nothing. They're at like over 1 million right now. So if they continue at the rate they're going, they're basically gone.
Wow.
By 2080. So that answers the question from that perspective.
I didn't know that worked. So
yeah, let me see, because I had a chart with all the statistics that was shared. But the PCA fared not much better. PCUSA didn't fare much better. I think what we would end up seeing, if we see a remnant of Protestantism remaining after the next 100 years, it's going to look more of like a low church evangelical type of institution, because within that type of framework, right? If the church stinks, the church closes down, you just open up a new church, and they have such a low bar for entry. I mean, anybody that is like a relatively well-read Christian can just become a pastor and then open up a church or something, or they become a pastor at the other church because they're well-read, and then they go off and they plant another one. It's very easy to spread from there. So I think within the Protestant context, that's probably what we're going to see, more like mega church style worship. I don't think that's dying off maybe anytime soon. It might, as people, but we would have to trust then that people are going to become more and more intelligent and wise to these types of things.
I wouldn't put my money on that bet.
Yeah, I think the main lines are gone next 100 years. Anglicanism's already going down the tube. I mean, look at the Archbishop of Canterbury is a woman that, is like pro unaliving, babies in the womb. So I don't have much hope
supports Islam more than she does traditional Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. Out of all of the mainline Protestant institutions, there's really only one or two that you could argue would be, somewhat conservative, and that would be the LCMS and then maybe the Anglican Continuum. But I don't know if you can consider the Continuum mainline. But I think either way, we're seeing all of those disappear in the next 100 years. Yeah, we were talking about just a second ago the ages of the congregations. The mainline denominations, like you said, they're like above 60 on average. So
average, yeah. So I mean, at best, that cohort has what 20 to 30 years being able to be regular church attendees. And I make the argument that Protestantism, because it's so rationally based and how you relate to God, that it's more of an ideology than religion. And I wouldn't say it's not religion. Of course I would, as a religious studies scholar, but my argument is the lack of sacraments and the real presence. So magic itself is about imbuing matter with spiritual properties. So that's the whole point of ritual magic. Can be, there's a lot of variations then in how you do that. Sex magic, black magic, ritual magic, sigil magic. But that's the whole principle than what we're doing with the Eucharist and actually participating with the mystical reality of Christ. And Protestantism, because it doesn't take that sacramental approach, it feels like it competes with communism and capitalism or neoliberalism ideologies more so than it actually can deal with like the real spiritual warfare underway in America. What are your thoughts on that as somebody coming out of the Protestant world and moving into the Orthodox? Because you mentioned the sacraments and the real presence and in reading, the Gospel of John. And if that stuff is real, which obviously every Orthodox believes, it makes sense then why Hollywood has even pushed this stereotype even further, that when somebody needs an exorcism, they go to the Catholic Church. Now, I don't believe that, in the real presence of the Catholic sacraments, but they are certainly closer to that, and they are a sacramental church. And so they can actually, I would argue, deal with the occult in a real way, a real meaningful way that most Protestants can't. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, with the Catholic Church, sacramental in the sense that they claim to have sacramental theology. Maybe not so much that they don't clip this out of context. We're not saying they have valid sacraments.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, from the Protestant perspective, you have the kind of higher church Protestants that would have sacramental theology, like the Lutherans, right? They believe in real presence of the Eucharist, baptismal regeneration. So do the Anglicans, but it's a different understanding. It's consubstantiation. So they hold that it's a spiritual presence of Christ in the Eucharist rather than say like real presence. Or maybe when people say transubstantiation, sometimes people get the ick, but if you understand it from the Orthodox perspective, not so much as taking an Aristotelian distinction, but just that Christ is truly present in some mysterious way.
Yes.
We are interacting with, I think no matter what you do, if you don't have the essence energy distinction, you don't really have a kind of true, or what's a way that I want to address this? Maybe a coherent framework for your Eucharistic theology.
Right.
Because if you don't, and you're operating from the perspective of divine simplicity, what are you really interacting with? Are you,
Right.
you're not saying you're interacting with God's uncreated energies. You're saying you're interacting with what? The essence? Are you saying you're participating in the essence? Because I don't know any theologian that would say that. Or are you interacting with like created grace? Are you going to say the Eucharist is created great? Like, you run into all sorts of kind of logical blunders there. But as far as like not having the medicinal properties, I think take it a step further, not having the doctrine of theosis is a kill shot for a lot of the Protestant perspective.
Well,
because
just the absence of that single doctrine has afforded all the heresies that they have, at least in the Orthodox. I mean, whether it be Arianism or Docetism, I mean, maintaining the possibility of true union with God and the transformation of man into something divine, like that's the whole thing that has to be maintained. And so the defense of the faith is dealing with these heresies that emerge that then contradict this singular truth. Obviously, there's more to Orthodoxy than that, but that really is the heart. That is the core that is being protected. And so you make a perfect point that they don't have that. And so how do most Protestants believe they're engaging with God? I'm not even sure. I mean, you talk with the average person who's not a theologian, what does their opinion matter? I would assume they would probably say that they interact with the essence of God, not knowing what even that means philosophically speaking or theologically. But what is the response to Protestants? Do they just adopt Aquinas, or how do they deal with, like, do you directly engage with God?
Yeah, typically they'll adopt like Thomistic, well, maybe not Thomistic theology per se, but it's a carryover from the West. I mean, it's all post-schism Western theology. So they're already, it's the framework is already built in intrinsically, especially with high church Protestants. Now, if you're talking about low church Protestants that come out of like the Radical Reformation, they don't have any roots at all, really. It's just kind of like we're winging it. You know, we can kind of make up whatever we want, which is why we see so much deviation in theology today amongst, like, say, the charismatic movement or like the Baptists or, you know, so on and so forth. You'll see a bunch of deviation where they're just kind of, in some instances, it seems like making it up on the fly. But I think kind of going back, there was a point I wanted to make about the medicinal aspect from the perspective of any Protestant. If you were to hold to sola fide, okay, now some people would contend this isn't the case, but they're probably coping to try to keep their framework intact. I'll just say that. So from the perspective of sola fide, okay, well, faith alone saves. So what use is works? Works would be, okay, well, they are the evidence of a genuine saving faith. Okay.
Right.
So there's no cooperation with the Holy Spirit there to give you that deifying grace, because you're cooperating with the Holy Spirit. It's not like our works are giving us grace. It's cooperating with the Holy Spirit. I'm not grieving the Spirit, right? I'm abiding in God's will. I'm receiving the grace. I'm receiving the grace sacramentally. I'm receiving it in the life of the church. In some sense, you could say, you know, sacramentally in almost every aspect. But from the Protestant framework, you don't have that medicinal theosis application of grace in that sense. The application of grace is sanctification. It's just, oh, this is more evidence that I'm saved, basically.
Right.
This is more evidence I have that saving faith. And for the Protestants that are watching, if any, don't think I'm conflating this with once saved, always saved. I'm not. But if you were to say, I don't know, if you believe in sola fide, then works are just an outflowing of your genuine faith. So your entire life then just becomes pocket watching yourself to see if you have genuine faith over and over and over again until you die. That's why a lot of Protestants, I think, suffer from anxiety so much. It's not a process of transformation. It's more, I'm fruit checking myself for the rest of my life until I'm dead.
Right.
So it's a little more nihilistic, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, that doctrine of sanctification, you know, I come out of the Methodist Church in Wesley. That was one of his things. But hearing that growing up, when I first was exposed to Orthodox, like, oh, okay, theosis, that must be where. But then you hear the nuance of what we're talking about, you know, and this isn't for everybody. You know, I don't expect every Christian to get into the nuances of how one becomes deified. And you know, there's a lot of people, you go to the Orthodox Church, the babushka there is not, you know, she's not reading Polemos in her free time. But for those that are interested, once you see that delineation and you see as you're talking about the coherency of the worldviews, which is really what apologetics is about, Orthodoxy is the only one that puts everything in its proper place and where it makes sense, and it explains it, and it correlates with Scripture, right? So that was one of the, you know, we hear the Protestant hangups like, oh, you guys are the tradition of men. Really? Because your book is absent a handful of books that you claim these councils that are divinely inspired put in script, put in the canon. So who's exactly the tradition of men? But you hear that so often.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just a tradition of man. Don't you understand that? Yeah. Well, I mean, from that perspective there, I mean, if you're going to operate from that sola scriptura framework, you're talking about traditions, right?
Right.
Everything outside of scripture is a sole infallible authority, right? So that would be the only thing that's infallible is the scripture alone. All traditions would then be fallible outside of that, including dogma. You have fallible dogma? What do you mean? So you can't, another thing, they can't objectively tell you who is and isn't a Christian. If you can't objectively answer that question, it's a very fundamental paradigm level question. You can't answer that for me. And I'm not talking about knowing somebody's salvation or something, but knowing whether or not that person's a Christian at all. So is a Docetist Christian? Is a Montanist a Christian? Is a fill in the blank? Are all these people actually Christians from your paradigm? Can you answer that for me objectively? The Protestant can't, because they have fallible dogma, they have fallible tradition. So none of that stuff is answered for us within the scripture alone. So they just kind of have to take a subjective shot in the dark.
Right. Well, and you go to a Protestant parish and start asking these theologically nuanced questions, and you'll find a variety of answers. And so, to your point, they can't even determine who's a Christian, and they're also reluctant then to make any sort of universal claim on a true church. And that's where they have this sort of spiritual body, right? You ask, people that believe in the rapture or something like that, and you're asking like, well, who's then part of this spiritual church? Well, I don't know. But if they're a true believer in Christ, they're part of it. It's like, well, the presuppositions, and maybe it's part of the Reformation, the Enlightenment that it's all built upon, but it's already opened itself up for ecumenism. And so when we're looking at the real threats right now in the 21st century regarding demographics, Islam is here to stay. As I just mentioned to you regarding the Pew Research Center, I think the average age of a Muslim worshiper was like 32, 33. So, and luckily the US, we don't have as many, per capita, like Europe does right now, but you're seeing the Hindus and the Indians, and they're totally transforming, at least cities here in the Midwest. I can speak based on firsthand experience. And I just don't see, outside of, that's not the America I grew up with for Protestants, like what the defense is, because they've already opened themselves up to not only ecumenism amongst themselves across the variety of Protestant faiths and then Christianity generally speaking, but all this interfaith stuff, which is very, very common. And so I don't see Protestantism being any sort of speed bump or preventive mechanism against the radical transformation of America, which is going to come if there isn't some type of true spiritual revival.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too, just from the practical sense, right? Without any real church unity. So Protestantism is very divided, and it's not, I mean, I think it can be a good rhetorical device for them to use to kind of cite it as an umbrella if they're talking about like statistics. Oh, look at our numbers, right? Like we have more. But if you were to break it down individually by denomination, it's not so good. And all of the infighting really would not, like, let's say there was some sort of crisis, right? We're getting overran by by Muslims or whatever in the United States. Just like you said, Protestantism isn't going to be able to put up any kind of defense against that. You have to have some kind of unifying body. That body would be the church.
Right.
Is Roman Catholicism going to really push back too much right now? We can see with the current
with their new Muslim prayer center in the Vatican.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think they are.
Well, and you've got Leo doing like the open the border speeches and stuff like that. I mean, there's no way.
Bowing down to a block of
I have
ice.
some thoughts. I have some thoughts about the origins of all of that stuff. I mean, talk about Freemasonry and things like that, and infiltration from a geopolitical aspect. I think certainly plays a part in that. But really, the only system that would practically put forth any kind of resistance in that sort of situation would be from an Orthodox paradigm. And
right.
The only way that we're really going to save, because this is what's coming, by the way, this is what it's coming to the UK. We're going to see a crisis there in the very near future. I don't think it's going to take too long. It's already a crisis now, but we're going to see it escalate.
Right. It just hasn't turned physical yet.
Correct. Well, I mean, it has, but it's not like, it could get
But
much
true,
worse.
true violent resistance is what I'm saying. I mean, even then, there's been little spots of it, but you're just with the flags, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're seeing that just by people putting up the Union Jack all over the UK, that this has been problematic for all the migrants. And I just watched a video the other day of some Indian MP in the UK talking about how I get your sentiments, but this is really making people feel uncomfortable. The flag of the country people are in.
Right.
So it's already at a precipice. And putting up the flag is a certainly nonviolent form of sort of identity and resistance. So yeah, I think the UK, and we talked about this on your channel. I mean, it's in the worst position. I don't know how they get out of it without physical violence, and it's going to happen soon.
Yeah. I think the only way we avoid it in the US is by making the US Orthodox, to be
Well,
completely
I
honest.
would agree. Yeah, I agree with that.
Because I mean, think about it. If let's look at the alternative. So either we stay where it is right now, where we've got a Protestant majority. It's becoming more and more secular by the day. They're, like you said, have already adopted Enlightenment values, more ecumenism, so on and so forth. Which I think, I mean, to be honest, you can say ecumenism in another form is basically just Freemasonry. Because if you were to read texts like the Alta Vendita, right, the pushing the kind of principles of the Enlightenment, that was kind of the playbook within the Alta Vendita to begin with. It was religious pluralism. It was a separation of church and state. It was so on and so forth. So you can slap the Freemasonic label onto the ecumenism movement. That's prevalent throughout every single mainline, just about every single mainline Protestant movement, with maybe the exception of the LCMS, but they're going to die out because of their kind of older, aging congregation. But look at Anglicanism. The origin of our country, George Washington, he was a Mason, and he was a part of the Episcopal Church.
Right.
You think that didn't seep into the foundation of the church in America when they were bringing over the Episcopal Church? Look at the main funders for the Washington National Cathedral, all Freemasonic backed individuals. And then if you were to look at their seminary in the Episcopal Church, built literally right next to the George Washington Masonic monument.
Right.
So, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to piece these things together. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about on the geopolitical side of that, but I really do think if you were to like set the Protestantism aside for a practical piece, we look at the Roman Catholicism aspect. They've got the same issues. They're embracing the principles of the Enlightenment. The Alta Vendita was directed towards subverting the Roman Catholic Church, and basically all of the objectives that were laid out in the Alta Vendita. People can say like, oh, maybe it wasn't a real, document or something. Dude, look at the objections or the objectives that were laid out in the text. Look at what the Roman Catholic Church is doing now. It's almost word for word what the game plan was in the Alta Vendita. I mean, if that doesn't tell you, like, set off some alarms in your head, it should. And if you haven't read that text, go read it. And then you can read other texts like Operation Gladio, where you can see how the P2 Lodge.
I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
Gladio,
I mean, it's not, it's so obvious once you've seen it, but go ahead.
No. That's exactly what I was going to just add to it was, Operation Gladio, and Dyer's covered this ad nauseum over on his channel, is the subversive elements that have already infiltrated the church. I mean, you already have Dr. Taylor Marshall. I forget the name of his book, Insurrection or something like that. I forget what, what I'm talking about, but his the premise of his popular book is saying that the Catholic Church is subverted from within. And, he struggles with sedevacantism and that type of stuff. But again, this isn't like a conspiracy theory, You bring up, the Lavender Mafia, maybe some people roll their eyes at that one, but Operation Gladio, the ecumenist Masonic elements inside the Catholic Church, like, just look at what's going on. It's literally a playbook. It's all falling into place right now. I mean, the Catholic Church doesn't really stand in opposition to any globalist doctrine. And I just saw Leo today, and this is an important distinction, that even within the Catholic Church, he's saying that the greatest threat right now is Trump's deportation policies.
Right.
Well, I'm all for having a heart for all people, right? I can give empathy and sympathy to everybody in their context and their plight. That does not mean that first world nations need to be inundated with third world people or second world people or other first world people. It doesn't matter where they're coming from, is that we need to maintain our national homelands. And so the Orthodox Church has the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Romanian Orthodox Church. And so this decentralized structure with national bishops that represent their jurisdictions and their dioceses already kind of entails a patriotism and an understanding of sovereignty and homeland, that the universalism of the Catholic Church is totally consistent with this globalist agenda. And that's why global warming, I mean, the only thing they're good on is really abortion anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And I think what you're talking about is the reason why practically the Orthodox Church would be the only valid way going forward, because a conciliar church government is the only thing that protects against geopolitical subversion within the institution. It happens, but
Yes.
you can isolate it to a certain jurisdiction. Like, I mean, we can get into attempted or successful geopolitical subversion within the Orthodox Church itself, but it can be isolated to a specific jurisdiction.
Yes.
So, I mean, that what you're saying is absolutely true. And it's also kind of like, it's like a cheat sheet for dummies too, as far as like who has authority over who. Well, look at the name of the jurisdiction, right? It tells you who they have authority over. Those within the jurisdiction, right? I see some Catholic apologists that are like, oh, it's because he says ecumenical patriarch. It means he's the Orthodox Pope, dude. Don't you understand this? Like, dude, I had to block the guy. I was talking to Pope Respecter. He rage baits me. He's like, he'll say stuff that's so like low IQ. I'm like, I have to like address this right now. But I'm like, don't debate, Ben. It's okay. I'm just gonna block you for the sake of my sanity. But
he argued that the EP has a sort of papal position in the Orthodox Church similar to the Pope.
Yeah.
What?
He said, you mean to tell me, what did he say? He said, you mean to tell me you don't submit to what did he say? What was the verbiage he said? He said, the ecumenical patriarch of the entire Orthodox Church or something. Because he was trying to hold me to some statement ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew had made.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, dude, like he's either very bad faith or very uneducated on.
Right. Well, and I love how they tried to pin us, God bless Patriarch Bartholomew, but obviously as a faithful Orthodox, there's a lot of things that not just me as some American convert, but many of the clergy that I personally know and speak to are upset with things that he's doing. So, I'm not here to condemn hierarchs, but certainly it's just known that Patriarch Bartholomew and really the EP in Constantinople has been tied with the CIA since Athenagoras, the EP before him. So I literally covered an article called the CIA's Patriarch, and it's about that. So that has been happening, but the Orthodox Church, because of this decentralized structure, okay, so we kind of have a corrupted, subversive, globalist, CIA affiliated EP right now. That doesn't nullify Orthodoxy.
Right.
Like, what? And so you see that all the time by the Catholics. They try to quote mine or grab something, the EP says something that's pro Zelensky Ukraine, which is a huge problem.
Right.
Okay. How does this disprove Orthodoxy? Oh my God, the Russian Orthodox is, fighting the yeah, okay. How does this nullify the church? I'm confused.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's been something throughout church history, though, where, either certain patriarchs have been used for geopolitical, whatever. I mean, just look at, the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople in the past has been a heretic. That's been, that's not something that is, that's new to church history. So we've had some of them that have been deposed or, tried at ecumenical council, et cetera, so on and so forth. Even the Roman patriarch in some instances has been, tried at ecumenical councils, usually after the fact. Right. But this isn't something that's new. Church history is messy, right? But that's why I'm saying the conciliar church governance is ultimately kind of, it's like the perfect safeguard, I think, from having the, like, I don't know, just from think about this. I'll like make it very simple. Look at like your evangelical megachurch, right? It's not hard for one guy to get like honeypotted or maybe like blackmailed in some
Right.
way, and then the institution is corrupted and subverted. Now it's like,
Right.
okay, maybe you're not receiving the 7,000 a post, like like some of the people were revealed. But you're basically saying like you're gonna do my bidding or I'm gonna release the tapes or something,
Right.
right? Like that's not difficult to do with one guy.
Right.
Okay. You might be able to do that with one guy in the Orthodox Church, but then how are you going to do that with the other patriarchs as well? How are you going to do that with every bishop? How are you going to
Right.
do that with, that's a lot more work than saying, I'm going to subvert the Pope. Right.
Right.
It's like, that's not that difficult.
Right. And I've heard the Catholics, they think that somehow is a deficiency of our ecclesiology, that we don't have this centralized power structure. We do. There's just multiple of them. And the
Right.
whole point is so that, just like you said, because we don't believe that bishops are infallible, because that's never been the case. I mean, so yeah, we don't believe in magic people, magic vicars that are infallible when they speak from a certain chair. So yeah, we've had a lot of bishops that were heretics and did bad things, and that does not nullify the faith. And even when I was on your stream, we had a Catholic who was arguing that the Council of Florence was one, they were upset with St. Mark because he didn't go along with it, but then insinuating that this showed that the Orthodox Church and the bishops have no or go back on their word or something like that. And my point to him was, no, the Council of Florence didn't work because the people, when the bishops came back, were so upset that they were willing to unite with Rome due to political and military reasons. Obviously, the Ottomans were creeping. They were taking over Constantinople, but it's the people. And so, again, I think for Catholics, it's like they can just go about and focus on their day-to-day stuff. And it's like, well, the Pope and the cardinals, they'll take care of the church. And for us Orthodox, it's like, no, it's the people that live the faith that keep the church. The bishops come and go. And some of them, God willing, it's not true, but what's the saying that the light posts lighting the way to hell are lit with the skulls of bishops or something like that.
Yeah.
Somebody knows the exact, it's a bad paraphrase, something to that effect. So we believe that our hierarchs can be fallible in many ways. And I think once people realize that actually it's the laity that has the power, and that's why it's important to be catechized. That's why it's important to understand what you're belonging to, because it's us, the laity, that have really preserved it. Yes, the clergy preserve the liturgical services and the vestments and some of the higher forms of our worship, but in regards to the actual faith not being changed, it has to do with the people believing it and holding to it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think you were mentioning liturgy. I think the liturgical argument for Orthodoxy is extremely strong, right? I mean, you have a liturgy that you could literally trace back to John Chrysostom, whereas look at the Roman Catholic Church right now. They're like pushing the trads out to the it's like, oh, we just found this nice trad church. Actually it's getting closed. Okay, well, we moved to Tennessee so we could find another nice trad church. Oh, actually, here's a message from the diocese. We're pushing all of these they're going to become Novus Ordo, masses or whatever. They keep getting shoved into the outskirts. And I mean, I respect a lot of the trads, don't get me wrong. Like out of the Roman Catholics, I think the trads keep it real. Typically they will acknowledge the issues within their own church. Like you mentioned, Taylor Marshall, I think he keeps it real with some of the issues within his own church. Avoiding Babylon, Anthony, I like him a lot too. Anthony Stein, another good trad. Obviously we disagree theologically, but at least they're keeping it real with some of the issues in their church. But back to the liturgy, look at the Novus Ordo. I mean, it's like what maybe 50 years old now. Yep. Dude, that's super, super new. How are you defending against innovation? You're not, you're just accepting it at this point.
Right.
So
yeah, no, I think that is their tradition, is like incremental innovation. And Vatican II wasn't incremental; it was a massive change. But
yeah,
I want to move the conversation in another direction. But before I do, Nathan Slippery through in 5 says, "What's this jazzy song that this lady sings?" It's a shout out to B-Dibe. So B-Dibe is an Orthodox brother who makes all the music. Some of it is Keenan Beats on my channel, but most of it is B-Dibe, and so he takes samples and then adds beats to it. And he's also did all my Orthodox chants. So look up B-Dibe on SoundCloud. I think he's on Spotify and stuff like that. And I have all his music on playlist. So, and I just wanted to tell everybody, if you want to support the stream, you have any questions for me or Ben, feel free to send in questions or comments using Streamlabs or Dono Chat, or if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. All the proceeds are going to help get me to DebateCon in Nashville. So we just moved. And so my wife and I are trying to get back on our feet. So if you want to help us raise some funds so we can get to Nashville, and we'll be doing the Athens and Jerusalem conference. I'll be giving a speech with Dyer and FDA, Father Vladimir, and Metropolitan Jonah the next weekend. So we got a big 2 weeks, Nashville, then Florida. So those are what the proceeds go to. And just want to let everybody know my box of books, they just came in. Sunday was the day that I received all of them. So anybody who's purchased a signed copy of my book, I will be sending those out later this week. So you can expect it probably next week or late this week for anybody. So I'll be going through the first batches of those. So anybody who's wondering, they haven't heard from me in 2 weeks, been moving. Books are getting ready to come out. And I'll be doing a stream tomorrow on what I would argue are the 30 most important or essential arguments for Christian apologetics. And that was going to lead into a discussion over at the Logos Academy. It's our all men's academy over on school.com, Logos Academy. We'll be doing at 7:00 p.m. tomorrow night, we'll be doing a think tank on apologetics. And at noon tomorrow, I'll do a live stream going over these 30 arguments. So anyways, just want to keep you guys up to date on everything and let you know about that. So feel free to, again, support the stream, send in questions for me and Ben, and we'll get to all of them. So the next thing that I wanted to ask you about, so we've kind of talked about Protestantism, everything kind of looking backwards, a little bit of speculation on forwards, but you are kind of indicative of a general trend in America right now, and me too. So I converted in 2019. I first got exposed to Orthodoxy in 2018, taking a PhD course on the church history and theology. That really weighed on me for about 6 months until I stepped foot inside of an Orthodox church. But really since 2020, and I know you're familiar with all the data and statistics, but Orthodoxy's seen a massive influx. I mean, I know you've spoken to multiple clergy, and so you cannot speak to an Orthodox priest without them telling you they have more catechumens than they've ever had before.
Right.
My question to you, as somebody who's converting, but also has kind of watched this phenomenon for the last 5 years on the outside and doing apologetics against it, why do you think Orthodoxy is becoming so successful in America? I mean, and the trend is true in Western civilization generally. I know Ireland and Germany, but in America, where we're at, why do you think Americans are converting to Orthodoxy, young Americans, at such a high rate?
I think really, I mean, there's a couple of different factors. I do think online apologetics is a huge reason. People being forced to kind of pick apart their own paradigm. A lot of the young men that I speak to that have converted to Orthodoxy typically will cite that it's because they heard some sort of like apologetic work online. So I think that mission field, Orthodox really own that, to be honest. Yeah. Look at the last 4 months of debates between Orthodox and Catholics. I mean, the Catholics are getting the floor like that. They're just getting wrecked.
Right.
The Protestants typically, I mean, that was the whole reason I created a channel, was because there weren't any Protestants doing it to like a very professional degree. Maybe you had like some slop posters that were like, those are traditions of man, you're an idolater.
You're not a James White fan?
No, I was never really a fan of his debate style, to be honest. I thought respect to him for being in the debate sphere for so long. I just question how effective it really was. I think there was like I don't want to go too far off topic, but there was like a boomer apologetics time period in like the early 2000s, maybe 90s to early 2000s, where it was misrepresentations of like usually the Roman Catholic position, because they weren't really doing Orthodox debates at that time. But it would be like, they're re-sacrificing Jesus every mass, you know, like that, like kind of like completely misunderstanding Roman Catholic theology for rhetoric points.
Right.
That worked on the guys that were cultural Roman Catholics, and they ended up becoming evangelical or whatever. But that doesn't work anymore. People aren't taking the slop. We're in the age of the internet now, where we can fact check your claims. So I think the rise of Orthodoxy in America really, I think, has a lot to do with the online element. Having so many people involved in apologetics, whether you say that's a good thing or a bad thing, you can't deny the results, and that's people coming to Orthodoxy. The other aspect, I think, is just disillusionment with the kind of Protestant experiment, right? You were saying no Protestant nation is like truly Christian anymore, and I completely agree with that. I think the ideas of the Enlightenment have failed. They failed. They failed the West. And you were saying, if we really want to hit that like old kind of like antiquated thing now for maybe 5 or 6 years ago, return to tradition or whatever, like if you really want to do that, you've got to become Orthodox.
Right.
And that's really the only paradigm that's consistent.
It's not the Leave It to Beaver 1950s.
Right.
Like some of those memes, like return to tradition, and show like a white man, a white woman, like 3 kids, a car, family, house. And it's like, no, we want that, but tradition goes way deeper than the 1950s.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think if we continue the way that we're going, because I do feel like there is especially, I mean, I'm not speaking ill of anybody, so I'm not mentioning anybody specifically, so nobody get upset when I say this, but I think there is like a knee-jerk reaction amongst maybe some of the older Orthodox to put the kibosh on the apologetic stuff. I think if you do that, you're gonna probably see your momentum slow down a bit. You really do have to embrace the medium of the age, which is the internet right now.
Right.
We need people making edits. We need that stuff everywhere. The edits need to be out there. The TikTok, whatever, you could think they're like low quality all you want, they work. We need people with YouTube channels doing these debates. They need to continue to do them. We can't stop doing the debates. We need more and more and more qualified people interacting in that type of way and addressing Protestant objections, addressing Roman Catholic objections. But I think ultimately God's doing the work right now anyway. And it's the water's rising. It's becoming apparent. The flood waters are rising. They need to get aboard the ark. It's becoming apparent to many people. Look at all of the scandals with the back-to-back scandals in the Roman Catholic Church. Eventually, we're going to see those Roman Catholics either, fall away completely, from Christianity, or become Orthodox. You see the waters rising within Protestantism. We're just talking about the Anglicans, right? They just elected Archbishop of Canterbury, which obviously is a subverted position to begin with. The government elects it, but is a woman that supports unaliving babies. It's present everywhere. Look at the United Methodists, right? They got like drag shows at their services now. They used to be relatively conservative. You can look in the Lutheran context. You can look at the ACNA. The ACNA was very conservative. Now they ordain women. There was a video of a guy that literally was like an ACNA Anglican bishop ordaining his own wife, and they were doing his wife was becoming a priest, and they were doing the vows, and it was like, do you vow to always submit to the authority of the bishop? And she's like, he, like,
oh my gosh,
dude, like the waters are rising, man. It's becoming obvious for so many people. It's going to get really bad, and then we're going to see an even bigger surge. This is like getting in on Bitcoin early. That's the way I'll put it. You know what I mean?
Well, and I totally agree with you. And I think that Orthodoxy is such fertile ground, and there's multiple reasons. I actually want to do a stream and sit down and really systematize all the reasons why I think Orthodoxy is so appealing. One is the feminization of Protestantism. So it's a very emotional form of worship. Even, the mega churches, the whole point is to get you to a state of ecstasy. Not that that's explicitly feminine, but to worship God in your emotions is a sort of a feminine way to approach the divine. It's not that you can't be emotional. Obviously you can have a true mystical experience, but every time sipping your latte and watching the rock band, like, that's not it. And part of it too connects back with the ancestral thing that we talked about, is I think that Orthodoxy gives young men a true identity. Protestantism does. I think Charlie Kirk was really riding that wave of like young white men in America finding this sort of general American identity with their Protestant faith. But even Charlie saw the shortcomings. And so his wife
Yeah.
was Catholic. And as we know now, for the last couple months before he was assassinated, was honestly inquiring into both Orthodoxy and Catholicism because he saw the shortcomings of his own Protestant faith. So there's a lack of identity in the West, right? All these, and I think even in Europe, you can see a difference between the Catholic nations. And, you know, a Catholic in Croatia or a true Catholic in Italy, it's very different than some Protestant in Sweden. And so you can already see that these traditional differences are already, you can already kind of see it in the Christians in Europe. But in America, I mean, what's the average American's identity?
Yeah.
And you become Orthodox, now you have an identity, a religious identity, a historic identity, right? I think for a lot of Americans, they don't realize that we're not even 300 years old, guys. Like, this is a blink in historic time of what we would consider America. And so there's a search for identity, authenticity, and I think something challenging, right? Orthodoxy is not easy. The whole point is that this is a lived faith.
Right.
And so it's very demanding. The fasting is demanding. The church services are demanding. We have a lot of services. The prostrations are demanding for certain people. So we worship with our whole body, and it requires a lot out of you. And one of the interesting things that I have a sociology text on religion, where what their experiment was to look at different faith communities across the United States and see why people stayed in certain ones and left certain other ones. And what they found was communities that were more demanding on people, meaning you needed to show up, you needed to be here, you had to do this, they stayed intact more. Where people who attended faith communities, mostly these were all evangelical, Protestant, and some Catholic churches, ones that you just kind of showed up and you were kind of nominally a part of the community, and maybe some people knew you, but you're not really participating regularly. Those people tended to leave and apostatize. And so because Orthodoxy demands so much for you to actually belong to the church, I think there's another factor there that compels people to want to belong. But I have a few other ideas too, but I think Orthodoxy fulfills a lot of the problems that have emerged in the Enlightenment project of the proto-Masonic America that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I do think it's if you're coming from it from the outside, especially from a Protestant perspective, it really is a correction of some of those, like you said, Masonic Enlightenment ideas. And those all ultimately, the Enlightenment project basically was instilling liberal ideas into society. So it makes sense that the worship would become more feminized, as you said. It makes sense that they would embrace more, even not so classical liberal ideas today. It's the logical endpoint of embracing that particular ideology, whether knowingly or unknowingly. You know, there's a good book that was recommended to me by Losky, is Mystical Theology of the Orthodox Church.
Orthodox Church, yeah.
And every single piece of theology is necessary, and there are effects downstream if you remove even a single piece.
Yes.
Orthodoxy is a complete mosaic. It's the entire thing. It's the fullness of the faith, and you really don't understand that until you've adopted that framework. And that really does flavor everything from being very involved in the worship service, being very involved in the divine liturgy, being involved in the life of the church, to the way that you think about things. And you don't even realize that it's had that effect on you until you've adopted the worldview. So I think sometimes Protestants will laugh at the idea of, like, well, you don't have the Orthodox Phronima. Like, you don't have you don't even have the doctrine of the noose. Like, hey, how are you going to understand these things? But that is actually very true. And it's not just an intellectual acknowledgement either. There is a spiritual component as well. Right. But I completely agree with Losky about, you remove one piece, it's all downhill from there. We already looked at the ramifications of removing the essence synergy distinction from your Eucharistic theology. It makes it not coherent. So kind of objective standards and imputed Enlightenment philosophy into your worship. Well, here we are today. This is the Western project. This is not what the West was meant to be.
And that was one of the questions I got on your channel was, I think somebody was asking whether it was Losky or Florovsky, I forget which theologian, but like, why are they so critical of the West? Like, I kind of like Orthodoxy, but I hate when they bash the West. And my point was exactly what you're bringing up. They're bringing up presuppositional differences that have shaped the intellectual trajectory of the Western world. And what I argue in my book is this delineation between the modern and the pre-modern. And I get this from Yanaros, Christos Yanaros, the Greek theologian. I don't know if you've read him. I'm a fan. I know Dyer's not much of a Heideggerian, so if you're into phenomenology, he uses the continental approach to his theology. He's much more Heideggerian, but he talks about how orthodoxy is a pre-modern worldview, and his critique, his major critique of the West. Obviously, you can get into scholasticism and all that stuff, but his is modernity itself. And so modernity is built on democracy, scientism, technological progress. And so I think for the Protestants is Protestantism just doesn't have a way out of the position we're in. And I argue that transhumanism is the fulfillment of modernity. So even though most Protestants may not say, I'm not a transhumanist, I never get, the chip put in my brain or whatever. The problem is, your presuppositions are part of the same modernist world. And I think as time goes further and further, you're going to see that more Protestants are going to become sympathetic to these things, not because theologically they think they're great, but presuppositionally they don't have a way to demarcate and defend against it. And so this mystical worldview, like when you're talking about the Eucharist, Orthodoxy, one of the, as Yanaros points out, one of the central dimensions of a pre-modern worldview is that it's not focused on rational definitions. And that is really part of the modernist project, the Enlightenment project. And so by talking about, how did God become a human man? Well, we can talk about the hypostasis, the hypostases and the theological categories, but it's a mystery. I mean, we can't rationally define how the leavened bread and the wine is the body and blood. It's a mystery. And this is part of this pre-modern worldview, which is also monarchical, right? So when you're talking about, I hope America becomes Orthodox, I've done a lot of streams covering eschatology and like prophecies from St. Paisios and some of the elders. And both Elder Ephraim and St. Paisios believe that when the Great World War happened, so the Third World War, America is not going to be bombarded by Chinese and Russian soldiers. What's going to happen is we're going to have an internal civil war, and there's going to be a geological climatic event. Could be, who knows what it is. Let's say the volcano in Yellowstone erupts, which would be major. That this is going to be the context that America is going to experience. And they argue that anywhere between 70 to as high as 90% of the population may be affected or perish due to this. But they say those that emerge on the other side, Orthodoxy is going to thrive in America. This is why Elder Ephraim, at the end of his life, left Mount Athos to found 20 monasteries in North America, because he thought they were going to be the harbingers of civilization, Christian civilization, once the collapse comes. And so I see that, because part of our eschatology as Orthodox Christians is that there's going to be this great world war. We already see the powers, they've been talking about this for centuries in the Orthodox Church, and we now see it. America, Israel, Western Europe, and then Russia, China, Iran, or the Persians, depending on how you want to categorize them. And when this great world war takes place, it's going to cause global devastation, but Orthodoxy is going to experience a golden age, because they argue that the Orthodox gospel has not reached every corner of the earth. Therefore, the Antichrist cannot come yet. And so St. Paisios talked about, just like you mentioned, using technology to spread the Orthodox faith, that technology is going to be used by the Antichrist. So he was super critical of credit cards when they came out in like the early 90s. And the use of all this stuff, because money became digital, money became tracked, and it could be centralized. But that all leads to this idea that technology, and Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu has been talking about this, technology is going to be the medium in which Orthodoxy is going to spread. And so you talked about the debates in the last, 2, 3, 4 months. And Orthodoxy is not even 1% of the U.S. population, at least to the last consensus. We don't know if officially how many Orthodox Christians there are in America since 2020. Speculations range wildly, but we do know that according to the last consensus, it's less than 1% of the U.S. population. But you look at online apologetics.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, can you think of another group that is totally punching above their weight class with the amount of people we actually have versus the efficacy of the debates and the dialogue that's happening?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's I mean, I think God's guiding it, to be honest. I think that's absolutely right. And I know, talking about Paisios, his prophecies, especially you're talking about the credit cards and stuff. I mean, we're starting to see digital ID come out. I'm like, come on, I don't want it to be that soon. You know what I mean?
Right.
With the UK is basically forcing that on people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Lord have mercy. I hope it's not,
Well, it's coming. I mean, according to the 2030 UN agenda, is digital currencies will be in place globally by 2030.
Yeah. Lord have mercy. Yeah. I mean, I think that really, one of the things from the Protestant perspective is like this kind of materialist approach to theology. And I think one of the issues that many Protestants will come into when they enter into the Orthodox Church, or they begin to, I guess, experience the life of the church, would be like interacting with things like this, like prophecies, or interacting with the lives of the saints and some of the stories, the hagiographies there, and detailing, I mean, miraculous claims, prophecies, healings, so on and so forth. But I think it is, if anything, evidence that God is working within the church.
Right.
If you were to talk to, I mean, most Protestants, being like kind of foundationally brought up out of Enlightenment theology, they kind of tend to be more of like skeptics. Like and I'm talking not just like they're skeptical about things, but they're like legitimately almost radical skeptics. Like it's a branch from their epistemology having kind of a broken foundation.
Yeah.
You almost have to be, in order to bridge that gap and not experience some form of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
So I think a Protestant approaching Orthodox theology might have some issues with, I guess, some of the more spiritual aspects, but I feel like God kind of bridges that gap for you as you live the life of the church. You really do kind of need to have your noose open in order to accept some of these things, for sure.
Right. No, but you made a good point. I mean, skepticism, right? When does skepticism emerge?
Right.
And again, it's part of the modernist mindset, and it's part of this understanding that we need to become skeptical, a la David Hume. We need to be total skeptics,
right,
so that we can come to rational certainty of the things that we can actually know. What can we actually know? And therefore, let's be ultimately skeptical about everything. But if that's, like you said, a sort of fundamental presupposition that's never really articulated because of the historic context these ideas emerge from, well, then you're already set on a trajectory where you're going to like cognize and rationally apprehend everything. Well, how the hell can you rationally apprehend sacraments?
Yeah.
How can you cognize and rationally apprehend like eternal mysteries that engage with you temporally? You can't.
That's a good point, because if you were to look at the way that they've kind of tried to formalize the Eucharist, it still doesn't work. Like even with Rome, with their Aristotelian distinction, it's present in and in and below, et cetera. And then if you were to look at the different iterations of consubstantiation, it's like, no, it's is it a local presence? Is it like is it more of a spiritual thing? Is it more of a ABC 1, 2, 3? And we're going to compile all of these different formulations, and they still miss the mark because they don't have the essence synergy distinction, not a single one of them. So I think for me, it's kind of like God leaving clues where the true church is. It's like, okay, if you can pick this piece here, like that's almost a direct thread, because the Orthodox Church is the only church that has the essence synergy distinction.
Right.
But you're absolutely right about the Enlightenment theology leading to skepticism, which leads to more of a rationalist, materialist, trying to figure everything out to like a very granular level, even to try to, I guess, rationalize the essence of God in some ways.
Right.
how do you do that? How do you rationalize the essence of God? The scripture says you look at my face, you're going to die. So
Right.
good luck with that.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you rationalize the burning bush? How do you rationalize the mysteries and the miracles of scripture itself?
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And so my argument, again, in my book and in my academic work, is that this modern pre-modern distinction is very real. And when you look at modernity regarding how people are fleeing the failed promise of Western democracy, and when you look at the left wing, you see like postmodernism, which again is a fleeing from modernity, fleeing from the central premise of rationality and science and technological progress and democracy. I mean, some of them are communist or whatever they think they are, social utopians, whatever. So you see that the postmodern leftists, the radical leftists, are fleeing modernity. Then you see on the far right all these wingnats and white supremacists that are moving towards paganism. Well, what is paganism? Is a pre-modern worldview as well. And then you see the Christians that aren't Protestant or getting into Catholicism, they're memeing the Crusades. Well, the Crusades, again, is pre-modern. And so I feel like even this is not a conscious thing that most people are thinking about. It's a subtle thing that's subconscious, that people are trying to find an escape from modernity, because you can feel the walls are closing in. You know, the digital currencies being one of them, right? And how do you escape this? Well, you just become a wild leftist, hedonist, or it's like, no, I'm actually like racial supremacist now, and I'm going to return back to the pre-Christian, like pagan faith of, you know, Odin and Nordic paganism or something.
Right.
But Orthodoxy, and I even had during my defense of my dissertation, so I had a sociologist who was into psychedelics. I had a Swedenborgian. I don't know if you're familiar with Emanuel Swedenborg. Have you ever heard of Swedenborgianism?
I mean, you could probably flesh it out more.
It's like the most mystical form of Protestant Christianity, right? Swedenborg's from Sweden. He was considered the most intelligent. Anyways, so that was one of the scholars. And then I had a Catholic philosopher, and her work deals with like neuroscience and concepts of personhood. And she's an expert in Aristotle. So, and she's a Thomist. So she teaches at the Dominican school. She's in the Thomistic tradition. And when she read my work and I was bringing up, so part of my argument is that Orthodoxy is the only pre-modern alternative for the Christian faith. You could argue the Orientals, but anyways, Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy is explicit. And I even got her to concede, because she goes, well, I mean, the Catholic Church, you could say, is pre-modern. And then I brought up, well, Vatican I, I mean, beginning with scholasticism, moving into Vatican I, Vatican II, I don't think you can fully say that the Catholic Church is pre-modern anymore. It's very much a modern institution. And even she, being a devout Catholic, said, well, yeah, I'd have to concede that. Yeah, I would say Eastern Orthodoxy is probably the only one that's still explicitly pre-modern. And I think that there's something there that is appealing to people. Again, like doing away with the rational certainty and like, wait, you're telling me miracles are real? You're telling me like spiritual warfare is real?
Right.
Like weird shit's going to happen to me when I try to enter the church? It's like, yeah, dude, like this is like all that shit's real, man. And if you try to join, like you're going to see. And that's what we're trying to bring you back to, is really, you know, if Orthodoxy, like the metaphor we used earlier, is a sort of corrective to our ancestral trees, moving back to a pre-modern worldview is a correction to our collective presuppositions. Because again, it gets back to monarchy and you know, there is no secularism, right? Secularism is another pillar of modernity, the Enlightenment project. There isn't any of that in the pre-modern world. You have religious kings, and then if they're Orthodox, that are overseen by the church. That's the way that government should work. And so even now, the memeing of the king or the monarch is like very edgy, you know, edgelord troll behavior. But I think there's a real yearning for that from young people.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, because that is kind of all the alt culture that you see popping up. You're right. You're either going radical leftist, or you're going like, all right, I'm posting like Vril memes and like Black Sun edits, or you're going to become Orthodox. You know what I mean? That's really yeah. Those are the 3 ways. You can write a book on that. The 3 ways, done. It's either radical leftist, I'm dyeing my hair pink, I'm like slicing myself open and like, all this
Yeah.
craziness, or you're posting Black Sun edits and Brill memes, or
Yeah.
you're becoming Orthodox.
Yeah,
So,
you worship Odin, invert your penis into a vagina, or you just become Orthodox.
that's right. Yeah. And that'll be the Mad Max world in the future. It's just those 3 factions fighting against each other.
Right. Well, and you already see it. I mean, so Zionism, that's dead. I mean,
Yeah.
right now it has a stranglehold because the Trump administration and, the political lobbies. But as I know, you look at the polling, it's over. Like, it doesn't matter right, left, center. It does not matter. Basically, in 20 to 30 years, there'll be 10 to 15% of the population that's Zionist.
Right.
And that's in America, the most Zionist nation on earth. So, outside Israel, that is. So there's serious change that's happening. And me dealing with, my methodology is like intellectual history. So I'm always looking at things like super zoomed out, looking at like how ideas and concepts and cultures change over long periods of time. I think this modern, pre-modern thing, not many people are talking in that way, but even like, are you familiar with like Curtis Yarvin?
No.
Okay, Mencius Moldbug. Anyway, he's kind of a political theorist on the alt-right, and he's from Silicon Valley. He's kind of tied in with the Silicon Valley elite, but he even talks about how just based on his perspective of efficiency, corporate efficiency, that Apple or major corporations run like a monarchy, and because of the way the power is just distributed. And he argues, well, then that's the way our government should be. We should return back to some monarchy. So he's a Silicon Valley Jewish kind of intellectual who is in favor of promoting monarchy or return back to monarchy. And again, my argument is why that's appealing. Because if you, in some of the alt-right circles, he's very, very popular. So he's actually a big name. If you said Curtis Yarvin, people are, oh yeah, dude, I've read all his stuff. Because he had like a blog is kind of a pseudonym, Mencius Moldbug. But even that is an affront to democracy, right? That is part of this. In how many Protestants could you get to say, yeah, I don't really believe in democracy or even a republic for that much. People always say, well, we're a republic, we're not a democracy. Okay, either one. I think it's almost baked into American Protestantism, mainline, evangelical, Pentecostal. It doesn't matter. How many of them are like anti-democracy as a political orientation? I don't know many.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that is something certainly to think about. I think the only thing that I would think about, like if we were to practically move to a monarchical system like that, would be you would almost have to have some form of conciliarity to it as a safeguard, because as we were talking about earlier, it's not too difficult to subvert one individual,
Absolutely.
So if you had, like you said, like, the bishops guiding the monarch, and he's kind of more of like you were to look at it as like a first among equals kind of thing. Like this is the civil arm, and then this would be like the theological arm, and they're like the advisors. That could probably work. You would just need safeguards to prevent subversion, foreign or domestic, upon the one individual at the head. That would be my only concern, practically moving into a system like that, because you see it even within the evangelical context, and even within the Roman Catholic Church context. Like I said, it's not difficult to subvert one guy. You can find something. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like imagine if tomorrow I got whisked off to some black site because somebody didn't like what I said online, and they took over my Twitter account. They started posting whatever they wanted. That wouldn't be an issue. That'd be very easy to do. Or maybe they have some kind of like data collection or something. They pull up something you said when you were 16 and it's damaging enough that they could use that against you. Well, now you're indebted to these people, and you kind of got to do whatever they tell you. So one guy being kind of put to the screws like that, super easy. Group of people, conciliar governance, maybe not so much.
Right.
Does that mean that the democratic system is correct? I don't particularly think so. I think that project's kind of failed.
Right. No, and just to be clear, me as an Orthodox Christian who would be pro-monarchy, I do not see that happening in America.
Sure.
And the only instance in which it would be efficacious, because I even heard Catholics, some of, I've saw at least, maybe, I don't mean to be pejorative, but it appeared to be like Reupers, followers of Fuentes, who are Catholic, who were in favor of monarchy and saying, well, we need to, we just need the 10% rule, and then we can take over, and then we can institute like a Catholic monarchy. And then me as an Orthodox Christian, getting back to the Council of Florence, my point would be, well, wait, the only way that would work is if the majority of the US are Catholic, right? So it has to go from the ground up. And so just like you're talking about somebody being corrupted, like if you have a nation that only is 10% Orthodox and you have an Orthodox king and monarch, like how's that going to work? That doesn't fly. So at least from my hopes, in an ideal situation, if the collapse of the United States were to happen, which I'm not advocating for, because that's going to make my life a lot more difficult, make doing streams like this a lot more difficult. But if it is, as many prophecies have speculated, moving into the future, it would take essentially a real reset, not the great reset of the WEF, but a real reset, a cultural reset, or maybe a large swath of our population unfortunately perishes through various circumstances. But those who emerge, as Elder Ephraim believed that he saw in a dream, were going to be devout Orthodox Christians with large families. Right. Well, imagine America that's half the size in the future, that is 75% Orthodox Christian, now getting the church to oversee, and then finding somebody who emerges as an ideal monarch from that population. To me, that's how that would occur. So I disagree with some of the Catholics that I've seen in the America First movement, even though I have much sympathies with some of the policies and the things that they're upset about, have more overlap than disagreements. But a strong disagreement is the idea that we should just seize power as like traditional Christians and then enforce that on everybody, and somehow that's going to work. Yeah, I just don't see how that can be the case.
You mentioned the Groypers. I made a joke today because I made 2 posts, right? And I was like, the first one was like how I feel Wesley Huff unfollowed me or whatever on Twitter.
Oh, did he?
Kind of like a joke, and I'm like, like the Ryan Gosling meme. I did another one. I was like, how I feel like, oh, now I woke up this morning, Gavin Ortland unfollowed me. I'm like, it's over. I did like a meme or whatever. I messaged Mario and Luigi. I was like, I should do it like a joke one next. It's like, oh, like, how could things get worse? Schizo Groyper unfollowed me. Like, what do I do with myself now? They always have the craziest username. It's like, whatever Groyper. I was like, just like pick the craziest one. Oh no, this guy unfollowed me. It's over. What do I do?
That would be funny. So Wes Huff unfollowed you. He's been pretty outspoken against Orthodoxy. So you think he's upset because you converted or something, or doesn't see you as a fellow Protestant apologist?
I don't know. I can only speculate, man. Well, obviously I'm not a fellow Protestant apologist, but I think the reason he followed me was because I had good arguments. And then from his perspective, at least, and those are no longer there. So the purpose of him following my page isn't there anymore. So
have you seen some of his recent critiques of Orthodoxy? What are your thoughts of those?
Oh, well, I mean, they've kind of already been addressed a little bit, but he posted the most recent one was
you've already addressed these?
Barrel Age Faith did a response video.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha.
I was checking that out today, and I thought it was pretty straightforward. He was kind of like conflating faith and works and stuff. And he was saying, it's like nothing that hasn't been said before. Your typical like evangelical talking points, they could be saved, but it's despite their traditions. These are traditions of man kind of deal. That's basically what he said. He was like, this is faith plus works. You're adding on to, like, he said the thing, like, anytime you say Jesus plus, then you don't have the gospel anymore. You say Jesus plus, then you don't have the gospel anymore. So from an apologetic standpoint, that's not too difficult to knock down.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to speak like Wes Huff, God bless him. If he was ever interested into Orthodoxy, dude, you could DM me. I won't tell a single soul. And I don't, and that goes for any person I've worked with in the past. If you're a big name Protestant or whatever, I'm not going to tell a single soul. I'm memeing at this point. Like, oh, he unfollowed me. Like, it's over. This is a Twitter unfollow. I'm being persecuted. Don't you understand this? Like that's such a joke. But on a serious level, though, if any of you guys that are Protestant apologists or big name guys, you're interested, I won't tell a soul. You can reach out,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for somebody, because obviously you were very much interested in history, that Cleave to Antiquity YouTube channel, and Wes Huff is so interested in like textual archaeology
Yeah.
and looking at the historicity of the church and scripture. I'm just kind of blown away by some of his low tier arguments against orthodoxy, and it could just be out of ignorance, to give him credit. Maybe it's just he hasn't looked into these things, and so he makes an argument that he thinks is accurate. But just to your point, some of the stuff I've seen is like really kind of basic, like you'd get from Billy Bob Pastor at the church. And for somebody who's an academic, one of the things I always try to do is I want to steel man. So whoever I argue against, I want to be able to state their position where they're like, yeah, that's what I believe. Okay, now we can move forward. And the straw manning of orthodoxy, the way that he presents it is like, bro, what?
I think he genuinely doesn't know, though. I don't think that's malicious. I think he genuinely doesn't know what the actual position is. He's a smart enough guy. I think
he is a smart guy. He's articulate.
I think eventually, if he were, because this is the thing, there's an intellectual aspect, but there's also a spiritual aspect. So he'll get the information eventually. It's whether or not his noose is going to be open, and he'll follow that.
Right.
You can grieve the spirit. I know I did at one point. Lord have mercy on me. I was beginning to kind of have some cracks in the armor, and I had a conversation with my senior pastor a while ago, and I was like, do I feel like I should, become Orthodox? I went to a church service once with a friend of mine. It was a Greek Orthodox church, and we went once, and then I was like, they said the word mediatrix. Like, I understand a little bit of Greek. I'm like, I have some issues with that particular doctrine. So I'm like, that allowed me to shut off they said mediatrix, I'm out,
Right.
like I don't like that at all. So I set that aside. I felt like super spiritually dry, like ever since that point, moving forward until eventually I finally accepted the call to seek into the church. But I think it depends. Is he going to be obedient to that call when and if that happens to him? Because he will get the information at some point. Is that spiritual awakening going to happen? Because that's necessary. You can have it all, but are you gonna accept it? Is it going to be enlightened?
Right. Yeah, God willing, he does. I think it'd be great if he became Orthodox. He'd be great especially with his expertise in arguing for our tradition, if so he chose or fully understood it. And so hopefully that's the case.
Sure.
But on the other end of that, people who are ignorant is like you have the Jordan Peterson phenomenon where he wears your tradition as a suit jacket. I don't know if you've seen like he'll have jackets covered in icons and Orthodox symbolism, like a schema jacket. And so curious what your thoughts are about Peterson, because for so many, especially through that 2016, 2017 first era phenomenon of Peterson, when he first goes on Rogan, he was a huge bridge with some of his biblical commentary and getting people to think, well, really, he was a bridge to Paggio, which was a bridge for people to get into Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And I found Paggio through Peterson, and I found Orthodoxy through studies, but then Paggio kind of confirmed and got me more interested. And so I'm curious what your kind of thoughts are about Peterson, because when he came back from the benzo addiction, he looked like he was getting ready to become Christian, like actually say, I believe in God, right? Actually say that Jesus Christ is God. Because his whole corpus for like 4 years is talking about Christ, but using Jungian archetypes and symbolism to articulate what we believe. And some of it is true, but it's, truth has multiple levels of meaning, and the literal is still there. Even though you can grab all these symbolic archetypes. And so I remember an interview he did with Paggio, and he came back from the benzos and he's crying, and Paggio's just saying, yeah, it's real. It's real, talking about Christ and the church. And yet then we fast forward to his sort of second reawakening, where he kind of about a year later then emerges back on the scene and has Peterson Academy, and he joins the Daily Wire. And then on the Jubilee interview, he explicitly states that he's not Christian. which I think dumbfounded some of the, because let's just face it, a lot more Protestants. I mean, I think Orthodox and some Catholics are much more critical of Peterson because of his presentation of Christianity. But I've seen a lot of Christian pastors use Peterson for pedagogical purposes regarding their communities. And now it's, he apparently he's having a health crisis according to his daughter, but he's in the last, what was that, 2 months ago, literally said, no, I'm not Christian. I've never said I'm Christian. And the Jubilee, when he was pushed again. What are your thoughts on the Jordan Peterson phenomenon?
Well, I mean, I think Peterson he was a very good kind of entry point for many people into thinking about some of these concepts like self-deprivation. You gotta make your bed, you gotta clean up your room. You know what I mean? Like like that kind of rhetoric, I think, was really needed for people that were dejected. I mean, he had a very specific target audience, which was disillusioned, young men that really felt like they didn't have because this was like COVID era, basically. People were going nuts. I don't know, like, people forget how crazy the culture was at that time. So I think he was a much needed voice during that time period. Maybe he didn't go as far as some of us would have liked him to go. But I think ultimately, like you mentioned, with his health crisis right now, this is the time every single Orthodox watching this stream, every single Orthodox out there needs to be praying for him, because when you go through a severe health crisis, you're face to face with God at that time. I remember when I had cancer, that was like, probably one of the most, probably the closest. It was up until that point in my life, that was the closest I felt with God, because I had nothing else to lean on. I had to lean on him.
What kind of cancer were you diagnosed with?
A cancer in a sensitive area. I had testicular cancer.
Oh, okay.
So,
I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I didn't mean to divulge any. Okay. If you've already said it publicly, then.
Yeah. Lance Armstrong, testicular cancer. Yeah, basically.
Okay.
But, yeah, it was rough for me because, sometimes it's like an easy thing or whatever, but they were talking about, I had like a rare aggressive form of it. They were going to take my lymph nodes from like my neck down, like every single lymph node. And they were saying, if you don't do this, there's a percentage it'll come back, you'll get lymphoma and you're dead. So I was like, well, you know what? I don't feel like living the rest of my life like test tube gub snail man. Like that would be terrible. So I don't know. I leaned on God during that time, and praise God, this is I think I only have one more remission appointment, like checkup, and I'm done. And then it's like, you're
already gone, man.
No more checkups necessary. You're good to go. So, I mean, I don't know. Through that time, you're given time to repent. You're given time to really focus on God. And, I'm sure a similar thing is happening with JP right now. So everybody just needs to pray that that's efficacious. And, because we're all called. We just have to answer the call.
Right.
So, and also keep my wife in prayer, because, she's got to go get a biopsy soon too. So.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy on you guys. Interesting. Well, yeah, I think that Peterson, he was beneficial for me. And it felt like after that first benzo and his trip to Russia and coming back, that's when his wife, because she also had a very serious illness during that time, she reverted back to her Catholic faith. I think Michaela, some form of Protestant now. And so when he came back, it looked like that's it, that phenomenon where you kind of hit rock bottom and then you find solace in Christ and God, and then he becomes a new foundation for you to build on. It seemed like that was going to happen. And then for 2013 or 2023, 2024, he's wearing all this Orthodox stuff, and he's presenting himself as some type of authority on Orthodoxy, or at least Christianity, and using Orthodoxy as some type of sheep's clothing. And I know people that are close friends that interact with Peterson, and I even brought that up to them in private messages. And he's like, well, I get it. I feel kind of awkward with it too, being an Orthodox, but he's on the journey. He's coming, like, just be patient with him. And then to see the Jubilee thing, like it was probably 9 months or 10 months after I talked with the guy, and see that he's explicitly saying he's not Christian. And that was kind of a resurgence of his fame and popularity. So maybe to the point that you're making, this sort of, kind of being undercut by this new illness, will hopefully he finds that newfound faith. And to me, his hero's journey, because he loves archetypes. If you're going to use Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the hero's journey for Jordan Peterson is for him to become a proselytize Jesus Christ, not as a symbol for speaking truth, but as a real incarnate God who took on human form as your savior. And I think if he did that, the grace would seep through all his teachings, and there'd be a new profundity, there'd be a new importance to it. And you can then see his journey and maturation. But my experience in academia is that it's very difficult for people who are really intellectually sophisticated to submit to the church as an authoritative epistemology over your own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a roadblock for sure. And I think also having a public platform can be a bit of a roadblock as well. But everybody's walk is different. Like we don't know his intention behind what he was doing or how he was presenting himself. He could have been genuinely seeking, and maybe he didn't have all the pieces there, or maybe he would seek and then he would find something else, and he's like, my framework has a gap, I have to reconcile this somehow. Whereas within Orthodoxy, it's not like you can't, like you're talking about coming from an academic background, you are almost intrinsically approaching this from a materialist skeptic position. So interacting with the claims of like the miracles of the saints, right? You're gonna have, oh, what do I have to figure out and have epistemic certainty that those are 100% true? How do I prove epistemologically a miracle? How do I lay that
by
out?
By definition, it violates natural, I guess, natural law, natural observation. I guess that's what science is built. Yeah. So by definition, a miracle already nullifies rational epistemologic certainty.
Yeah, I think those are probably things that he struggled with. I mean, obviously, I don't know the guy, but I'm just thinking if somebody coming from a academic background, those would be things I could see them grapple with. And maybe you become more and more convinced, and then you come up with, now there's another thing. Now there's this other thread I have to untangle. And, if you're not fully committed at that point, I could see you kind of going back and forth a bit. But with people like that, sometimes, a near brush with, your own mortality, it can be something that causes some of those things to become secondary when that's at the forefront of your mind. Because I think a lot of us, we think at a very basic level, we're going to have another day. Like we're going to be here tomorrow. I can figure this out in the future. So let me put off this, decision until later. And again, I'm not the guy, so I don't know. But normally, as somebody who was an associate pastor, as somebody who worked in pastoral ministry, I never was at somebody's deathbed and heard them say anything other than trying to be reconciled to God, or regret for the things that they didn't do in their life, like spend more time with their kids or whatever. Like there's always some kind of moral regret, typically, unless you lived a pretty solid Christian life in which you're like, I'm ready to go home kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like I've ran into some of that as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think with Peterson, this is probably going to be, this will be something that brings him closer to God and closer to that decision, if he's not already there at this point. And I think something that we need to take into account too, for even the bigger name, like say Protestant figures out there that maybe a lot of Orthodox are upset with, a lot of these guys are grappling with the truth too. You never know if, another person similar to my position ends up coming across the aisle. That doesn't mean go easy on the guys. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying understand that each person is on their path to the answer of this question in a specific way. So I think you need people, we're talking about the approach of how Orthodoxy grows. You need people who have that direct, aggressive approach, right? Because that's helpful. That breaks down the paradigm. But you also need people holding the net, like, hey, I'll receive you gracefully. I'm going to welcome you in with loving arms and not tell anybody, that you're going through this, especially if you're like a public figure and you're inquiring. Like, you have to be able to have some level of trust. It's like, okay, are you going to ruin my entire career by me confiding in you or something, or asking you a question? So those are all things that people with a public platform, I think, grapple with in the background, that a lot of the kind of like people watching from the sidelines maybe don't see. And then grappling with that in real time, take on the extra layers for JP, academic background. That just makes things way, way harder.
Right. Last question, and then we just have a few super chats. We'll get out of here. I appreciate you giving me the time. My God, this dude just did a stream at Jim Bob before he hopped on, so he's been sitting in that chair for at least 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah, rock on. Let's go.
My last question for you is, seeing some of the Protestant reaction to this phenomenon in regards to people coming into Orthodoxy. Gentleman, I believe his name's Joel Webbin. And he's a Protestant pastor, and I believe he's in Texas. And I covered a video he did trying to prevent Protestants from going to Orthodoxy, and it sounded like he was just upset with Father Moses McPherson. So he's a like strongman competitor and lifts weights and kind of has a macho masculine vibe as a priest. A lot of the Orthodox priests online, they have a different vibe. Father Cyprian has a different vibe than Father Josiah or Father Moses or Father Turbo. And so it's cool. Each one kind of has their own way of communicating. But Webbin was basically amounting the conversion to Orthodoxy as just an aesthetic appeal to masculinity. That was basically most of his argument dwindled down to that. I'm sure his criticisms of Orthodoxy regarding icons and the theological is probably normie Protestant Reformed stuff, but Webbin is very outspoken against Zionism, so he's not a dispensationalist. He's very I don't know, I've never heard him address secularism explicitly, but he identifies as a Christian nationalist. So maybe he's already moving against secularism, and maybe it's not explicit, but in some way kind of. And so I think I saw Gavin Ortlund, even though he was just at Father Josiah Trenum's parish in Riverside for the marriage conference. I think he did a video like a week or two ago criticizing why so many people were coming to the Orthodox Church. What are your thoughts on these prominent apologists or somebody like Webbin, who has a faith community of his own that he leads? And is trying to appeal to young men to say, hey guys, stop leaving Protestantism. Like we can be based and cool too. What are your thoughts on this phenomenon, generally speaking?
Yeah, I think with Webbin, I think I might have some unique insights. He posted a while ago. I don't remember exactly when. I'm horrible at time. But he had posted something like, or he was talking about this. He said that he was having issues reconciling Christian nationalism with the Baptist movement, because Baptists are basically by creed, most Baptists are pacifists. So if you were to become a Christian nationalist, obviously there has to be some sort of threat of force in order to enforce literally any law. You can't have a pacifist state. So he was trying to reconcile being a Baptist with the Christian nationalist movement. And he said, he was having a tough time doing that. And he said, eventually, for the time being, this was his verbiage. He said, for the time being, I can remain Baptist without too much strain on my conscience. So that's what he said. So he's fighting with something, right?
Right.
So he says, without too much strain on my conscience. He said, eventually, if there came a time, I may have to jump the shark. That was he didn't get very specific, but my guess is, because he's done a lot of collaborations with Roman Catholics, is that's the position he's moving into. If I had to make a prediction, I would say Joel Webbin is going to become a Roman Catholic. He's done collaborations with, I believe, just name your big name Roman Catholic channel. So I think that's the direction he's going in, because he used the language "jump the shark." He didn't say like, "I was going to have to cross the Tiber." He wasn't being specific, but he was addressing and lamenting some of the short-sightedness of the Baptist movement in relation to Christian nationalism. And I think he's more maybe he likes the monarchical system, like the Groyper kind of idealized version of it, like a Catholic state. So I think that may be the direction. He hasn't been that explicit with it, but that's where I could see. If I was going to speculate, I would see him go in that direction. With the Gavin Ortland thing, that's something completely different. Let me address his comments on orthodoxy.
Sure.
I think that's part and parcel with where he's drifting, in my opinion.
Which one's he, Ortland or Webben?
Webben. So we're talking about Webben. I think it's part and parcel of where he's drifting, potentially over to Rome. And if he is drifting in that direction, I think maybe he sees the Orthodox as a bit of a threat to his changing worldview. And if he's not there yet, because you don't know, everybody's walk is completely different.
Right.
That could have been like he feels in the moment, like this was like a moment of weakness. Maybe I shouldn't have said, or whatever. Maybe he's just feeling frustrated with the weakness of the evangelical movement and Baptists in general. I think eventually we'll see that change from him. So this is natural to that progression. Because to be Roman Catholic typically is to be anti-Orthodox.
Right. I thought he would be in favor of like an American Anglican version, like an American, explicitly American Protestant church, like a universal American church or something. But what you're saying makes sense. Just going back to Rome. Yeah, and it maintains the Western identity. I think that's a big hang up for a lot of people is they're like, I'm not Eastern. My heritage is German or my heritage is Northern European. Right. I don't want to be Eastern.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on I'll save that, but I want to get into the Gavin thing.
Yeah.
His Orthodox response thing was a response to my conversion. So that was that video that was responding to my conversion. And then he posted something about backing, trying to break down icon veneration as like an apostolic teaching. But I think a lot of that is in response to me leaving the Protestant camp. And in that same video towards the end, he had mentioned, and I mean, all respect to Gavin, much love to the guy. I would still consider us friends. We haven't had too much of an in-depth conversation since then. He did reach out to me when I made the announcement. He said, "Hey man, I'm here if you ever want to chat. Love you, dude. God bless," or whatever. And I was like, "Hey, thanks. I appreciate that." So he's being a class act,
right?
But then unfollowed me on Twitter and started attacking Orthodoxy. So but I think that's natural. I think that's a natural thing. You see, one of your guys that you viewed maybe as a colleague or somebody who is helping the movement or whatever way.
Yeah.
Now they've left and they've gone this other direction. That's a threat. That's a threat to what you're trying to accomplish, which is to ease the conscience of, because that's his his view, ease the conscience of people with ecclesial anxiety. That's the way he brands it, ecclesial anxiety. So they have anxiety over the one true church claims. So the purpose of the channel, Truth Unites, ultimately is to ease the conscience, remain evangelical, remain Protestant. I don't really care which flavor of Protestant you're going to be, but remain where you're at. Do not follow the impulse that you're getting from the anxiety, from the cognitive dissonance that you're facing. And I think
the house is on fire, but do not panic.
Yeah, I think that is kind of part of it though. And the people that are dealing with ecclesial anxiety, there's a reason for that. I mean, I've never really dealt with it. I didn't. The one true church claims was never like a factor. Maybe the truth of the anathemas and the consistency of the first millennium logically makes sense, and was convincing to me. But I've never been swayed by like emotionalism, like oh, am I going to be saved? That's never been a factor for me. But for many Protestants, that is the case. They're like, there's these churches that have exclusivity claims. So how do I know? Because within the Protestant mindset, like I said earlier, I'm checking my fruits consistently. I'm checking to make sure I'm good consistently. I'm checking my fruits. Do I have genuine faith? That's like kind of the constant, kind of like pocket watching yourself. And that's what's built in. That's the mindset. It's not medicinal. It's a pocket watch. Like I'm checking myself. I'm checking myself. I'm checking myself. That's why you get like Puritanism. That's why you get like the kind of like, no dancing or no, don't drink alcohol or, whatever the case may be. That's an outgrowth from that mindset. But anyway, with the ecclesial anxiety thing, my message to the people that are suffering from that would be, there's a reason for that. That's cognitive dissonance. You need to follow where that goes. How do you know that's not God telling you that you need to move?
Right.
And you're just stifling the Holy Spirit. You're grieving the Holy Spirit.
Right.
You don't want to be in a position where you're doing that. So I would say if you're dealing with ecclesial anxiety or whatever the case may be, take that as a kind of like an alarm to go and reevaluate your worldview. Why is your worldview causing you anxiety? There's a reason for that, right? And we were talking about Losky's mystical theology. That piece right there, that sola fide piece right there, that is the precursor to having ecclesial anxiety to begin with.
Right.
So if you didn't have that, if you didn't have this false idea of, we're talking about ecumenism, we're talking about branch theory, if you didn't have these false ideas baked into your worldview, then something coming in and challenging that causes you anxiety. That tells you there's a deficiency in your worldview that needs to be addressed. If there's an alarm going off in my house, smoke alarm, I'm not going to sit there and just take the batteries out of the thing. There's a fire somewhere or something's going on, or maybe, carbon monoxide alarm's going off. I'm going to take the batteries out and pass out on the floor. But that's what you're doing, but it's with your salvation, basically. Right. It's like, I'm just going to, if I were the demon from Screw Tape Letters, that would be one of my tactics. It'd be like, all right, guys, well, let's look over here. I'm going to pull up this one historical thing and say that, I don't know, this quote actually says he didn't like icons too much. You ever think about that? Yeah, anti-chirp. But anyway, rant over. There you go.
Well, and I think the point you're highlighting too is I didn't realize that his brand was, stay calm, everything's fine. I don't watch Ortland a whole lot. I've just caught a little bit of his stuff. I'm familiar that, he's a articulate, well-educated man, coming from the Protestant perspective. Mm-hmm. But your point highlights that they're feeling the cultural pressure. Like I've seen some try to dismiss this thing going on with Orthodoxy. Like, you guys aren't really growing. You guys are so small. You're insignificant. Nobody wants to be Eastern, this type of thing, but it's happening. And I think within the last really 6 months, you're, at least in my perspective, and I could be biased because I'm already Orthodox or my algorithm, whatever, but what I'm seeing is people, especially Protestants with pastors, like responding to this because that's where the young men are moving towards. And they can feel that there's a cultural energy there, and they can feel that the Protestant church doesn't have the same energy. And I think they're a little confused on where the energy is coming from. I mean, from my perspective, I think it's the Holy Spirit. I think these are real energies, and that people are being drawn for real purposes. And because the questions they're asking are so sincere in their heart, that they're actually being led. I, as I told you on your stream, I believe that, truth will set you free. And if you knock, God will answer. And if you're just kind of lukewarm, I think you'll find, just like with your mediatrix, like you'll find reasons not to. But if you're actually open and you're sincere, I think the breadcrumbs just keep leading you further and further. So yeah, I just was curious what your thoughts were on that whole scene and what's going on, because to me, the fact that they have to make so many videos, and I saw another channel that was just devoted. I mean, it had they did apologetics against Catholics and Orthodox, and I don't remember, the channel wasn't huge, maybe a few thousand subscribers, but they had multiple videos that are just focused on Eastern Orthodoxy and why people shouldn't convert. And it's like, the only reason you're making this is because it's happening. It's really happening. Yeah. And it's not easy. Like, there is no altar call. Like, everybody who's coming is signing up for a year of catechism. So it's quite amazing. I do think it's the Holy Spirit that's doing it. But anyways, let's get to some super chats. Thank you very much, brother, for being here again. Shout out to Cleave to Antiquity YouTube channel. He's tagged in the video title. So that's a hyperlink. You can click it, go straight to his channel, and give him a sub. Octavian throws in a generous $20. Thank you so much, Octavian. He says, you guys need to quit your heretic ways and join pro-Protestant and Catholic Church. Pope Leo and Pope Laura White are the modern day saints. Nice. Oh my God. If there isn't an indictment against American Christianity in general, It is the Christian Faith Office at the White House, led by, I think it's Paula White. It's not Laura White. It's Paula White.
Yeah,
But
we're sending the African angels. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Did you see?
Yeah, it's like,
Baba, we're sending the African angels. They're being dispatched right now.
oh, just within this year in 2025, she was at the White House telling people that if they send her $1,000, they'll be blessed financially.
Yeah.
It's like, and the fact that this is the White House, this is Trump's official private pastor. One, it's a woman. Two, she's a prosperity gospel. Three, she's been in adultery like 3 times. And 4, she's corrupt and she's been found. It's like, the list goes on.
Dude, you gotta learn the ultra secret grifting techniques that the charismatics are using, man. It's like we're not ending the stream until you send another 3 $20 super chats. You gotta plant the seed. If you don't plant the seed, do you want a $5 blessing or a $20 blessing? You know, like, that's what they do.
Right.
That's crazy, man.
You're right, though. My methods here are not up to par compared to some of the prosperity preachers.
You gotta have your own like grift your cryptocurrency, like
yeah. If you don't have the Vatican Bank, you need a grifto, a grift option through prosperity. So next one, thank you very much. Was it Silva Rogue Rogor 5469 became a COTEL crew member. Thank you so much, brother. God bless you. Joe Skill said, I think Wes Huff is in denial. Very possible. God bless him. Hopefully he comes to the true faith. TS347 throws in a generous 20, says, fellow Hoosier here. Well, shout out to you. Glad to have found both of your channels a month ago. I've watched the video on Logos Theology multiple times. Appreciate the work you do. Well, thank you so much, brother. I'm be curious where you're at in the great state of Indiana. But God bless you. Thank you very much for the support. Octavian, throws in 10, says, the last straw for me was having a Lunchable snacks as communion. What? Grapes and crackers. I did not participate. Yeah, I think like you're talking about the real presence. If you're interested in the faith of your ancestors, they took the Eucharist every Sunday, every liturgical service, and they did believe in the real presence. XX Lockstep throws in 10, says, thanks, Playa. Well, thank you very much for the support. God bless you. And then over on Dono Chat, we had a few comments come in over on Dono Chat. Heidi B. Mary throws in a generous $50. Thank you so much, Heidi. God bless you. Says, happy housewarming to you both. Thank you so much, Heidi. My wife and I do appreciate it. Jacob throws in $3.99 and says, sub to DPH Clips. That's right. I have a Clips channel, Dr. DPH Clips. I'm sure there'll probably be clips from here. So go subscribe to Dr. DPH Clips if you haven't. And Riley throws in $5, says, I was baptized into the Orthodox Church this past April. What books would you recommend to start a philosophy journey from an Orthodox perspective? Philosophy journey. Well, my first response, and feel free to chime in. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this, especially someone coming into the church, is I wouldn't begin through philosophy to enter Orthodoxy. In fact, if you are philosophically sophisticated, I found that people who are not into philosophy, who make philosophy the thing, get confused. It can be difficult. I would actually second what Cleave the Antiquity said. If you are familiar with philosophy and theology, why don't you read Lasky's The Mystical Theology? Because that will set a fronema basis for how we understand what's going on as a worldview. And then you can take that perspective that Lasky lays out, and then you can go read something like Dr. David Bradshaw, Essence Energy Distinction, or Aristotle East and West. Those are going to be much more sophisticated, or Yana Ross. Anything Yana Ross is going to be very, very philosophical. But if you don't know the Orthodox faith, reading philosophy is not going to help you, because those people like Yana, they're Greek Orthodox. They're rooted in Orthodox. Lasky, Florovsky, there's a Russian Orthodox. They're rooted in it. You as a convert, not knowing the faith and trying to read their stuff, you're going to come to probably incorrect conclusions. So I would recommend reading Lives of the Saints, reading basic catechism stuff. If you are a little bit more sophisticated, reading Losky is really important because it gives a sort of aerial overview of the mystery of what we're dealing with here. And then you can take the rational strategies of philosophy to understand things or see the differences between the East and West. But what would your thoughts be to somebody who is recently baptized and wanting to look into the philosophy journey or wanting philosophy decks?
My advice to you would be ask your priest first.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, ask your priest to see what they think, because people are going to give you different stuff, and depending on where you're at, they're going to know more, right? So like they're going to know more your personal situation. Somebody gave me an example not that long ago. I was on the phone with my buddy. I was talking about a conversation I had with the deacon at our church, and he was saying it's like he's got to be able to give you a prescription for whatever is broken, right? You all have different injuries. So it's like, I could be like, I could tell you from my perspective, it's like, oh yeah, I had a broken spine and I had to have complete reconstructive surgery or something. That worked really well for me. You say you have a toothache, that should do just good. Just do good.
Yeah.
It's different for each person. But if you're interested, I guess some book recommendations, I think Losky's Mystical Theology, I agree, would be a good kind of introduction. It depends on your reading level, though. If your reading level is not that strong, you might get lost reading Losky. A more like kind of basic approach, maybe like the Pelican set, church history set, because it's going to dive into, it'll give you the framework at least historically, and then you can build from there. But if you're interested in the philosophy, I would say read Mystical Theology, the Eastern Church by Losky, read the Triad by Palamas, so you have a good understanding of essence energy, because that's going to flavor everything else that you're going to read. You can read Orthodox Dogmatics. That might be good.
Yep.
If you're going to read like beginner, like catechism stuff, I would say if you're going to read stuff like the Orthodox way, just know there's some weirdness in it too. Like some of the illustrations he uses aren't the best, so maybe not the best like intro book, but it can still give you a somewhat okay overview. I don't like the ecumenist speak in there though. He was talking
well,
like,
that Lord have mercy and memory eternal to Callisto's Ware, but towards the end of his life, he became pro LGBTQ. So that's one of the unfortunate things about he was, his books, especially the Orthodox way, very popular, helped a lot of people. But he became very soft towards the end of his life on the gay marriage and homosexuality issue. So keep that in mind. And if you do, Riley, because you are baptized, so I assume you've already gone through catechism. If you feel like you got a strong grasp and maybe you are philosophically oriented, I'll give you a real perspective. So if you're interested in philosophy, okay, so anything Florovsky or Losky, Stanilo is going to be good. Demetrios Stanilo from Romania. I like Ross because he's coming out of the continental tradition. He's not an analytic philosopher. If you're interested in the analytic side, anything Dr. David Bradshaw, I love his stuff. Energy essence, like I said, Aristotle, East and West, the Eastern natural theology. He has a book on natural theology, how we understand that from an Orthodox perspective. And then these right here, again, if you're pretty sharp, these are called empirical dogmatics. I haven't worked through them, but I use them for my research. These are done by Metropolitan Nafpatkos Hierotheos, and it uses a lot of John Romanides stuff, but this systematically goes through and discusses things, but is responding to questions in very academic, intellectually sophisticated ways. So I agree with what Ben's saying. It depends on where your reading level is, right? And none of this stuff is important for your orthodoxy. That's why, somebody like Father Peter hears it and tell you, just read the Lives of the Saints, read, basic Orthodox stuff. And once you're there, you can always dive into deeper waters. But if you're interested in the church fathers, then you mentioned the triads. I would definitely support any, if you're interested in like Logos theology, St. Maximus the Confessor, the cosmic mystery of Jesus Christ, to understand the Logi Logos distinction. St. John of Damascus, his Fountain of Knowledge book is literally him talking about how Orthodoxy can use philosophy in regards to apologetics. And then the Cappadocians, anything Cappadocian is going to be good. So if you're, Chrysostom, Cappadocians, Damascus, Maximus the Confessor, Gregory Palamas, if you've already consumed all that stuff, dude, you're probably in like a 1% position of people. So if you haven't read any of that, that is plenty on your plate. That'll probably take you a year or more to get through all that stuff. So
yeah, read Augustine and get psyoped into thinking like all sorts of like wild Latinizer stuff. No, I'm just
oh, no.
Sorry, now we're getting controversial.
No, yeah. I know there's some people they will die on the hill of Augustine, and he is a saint, and he had great things to say, and he was good in some of his apologetics, but he also had some errant ways that unfortunately it seems like some people are constantly trying to defend and incorporate in the Orthodox faith. But anyways, guys. Let me just double check. I think that does it for today's stream. As I said, I'm going to be back tomorrow morning. We're going to be doing an early stream at noon Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. We're going over 30 of what I would consider the most important apologetic arguments, 10 for the existence of God, 10 for Christianity against other world religions or faiths, and then 10 for the Orthodox Church. And then we'll be leading that into a Logos Academy meeting, 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow, if you're interested in actually discussing apologetics then with a group of men. So I will see you guys then. Ben, is there anything you want to shill? Anything you want to promote? Anything you want to tell people before we wrap up?
Yeah, let me pull up my calendar and I'll kind of shout out what I got coming up next, and then we can wrap up here. So on the 16th, I'm going to be on Bryce J's channel, so you can catch me over there if you want to check out. I'll be hanging out with him. On the 17th, I'll have Craig Truglia on my show, so you can swing by. We'll be yapping, I think, about icons and some other topics. On the 21st, I'll have a live stream with Jay Dyer, so if you want to see that, he'll be on my channel, Jay. And then on the 24th, it'll be FDA. We'll be hanging out, yapping about theology. So a couple cool live streams coming up soon with some guests lined up there. And then I'm going to get back into inviting priests on and doing Q&As. So if you're interested in, I guess, asking a priest your questions, subscribe and check out some of those like Inquirer Q&A live streams. That's what I'll be doing with Jay, by the way. We'll be doing a Q&A stream. So
cool.
That'll be cool.
Yeah, go subscribe. Again, his channel is hyperlinked in the title. Just click it. It'll take you right over to his channel, and give our brother a sub and support the work he's doing. So God bless you, brother, you and your family. What's your wife's name? I'll say a prayer for her. Amanda. I'll say a prayer for her tonight. Well, God bless you and Amanda. I wish you guys the absolute best. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. So as always, until next time, God bless.